Welcome to my presentation, Uncertainty and Decision-Making. My name is Glenn Borthesol, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you something of what I have learned on this topic. We all know that decisions are difficult, and that other fields of knowledge have been engaged in analyzing decisions from different perspectives. Here, we have a pop psychology perspective that tells us something we already know about decisions, along with a mathematical model, which tells us something we don't quite understand. Uncertainty results from many factors, and starting by accepting that it is a complex and perhaps undefinable process is a good place to begin our journey.
We are all used to being in positions of uncertainty. Which path should I take? Which one will take me to the destination where I want to go? What happens if I choose the wrong path? Today we will talk about uncertainty and educational decision making. Specifically, we will look at what uncertainty is. We will look at different approaches and factors in educational decision making, and we will discuss other ways to engage people in our decision making processes. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the journey.
The Alberta Superintendent Leadership Quality Standards include a reference that the use of evidence is to be included in decision making, in this case in regard to student assessment and evaluation. These references to evidence-informed, evidence-based, or evidence-driven decision-making are included in policy texts and in conversations in all educational jurisdictions, and have been supported by various authors such as Cooper, who stated in 2009, "We are still required to act today on the best available grounds, and research, for all its imperfections, seems preferable to tradition or intuition as the basis for public policy and practice." However, what are the implications of this approach for educational practice and how decisions affecting students are made? There are different views on this topic, of course, and the debate often comes down to a binary choice of professional judgment versus empirical research, as is shown in these contrasting quotes from Biesta and Hempenstall. Biesta argues that researchers forget that what matters in education crucially depends on judgments about what is educationally desirable, unquote. And while he expresses little belief in the ability of practitioners to make good decisions for the right reasons, his argument is that we should be more concerned with the ends, meaning the educational desirability of an action or a policy, as the more important discussion. Hempenstall, on the other hand, presents another side of the argument and defines evidence-based practice as leading to practices having reliable, replicable evaluation research to support it. And because this has not always been the case, in his view, teaching has suffered in comparison to other professions. Practitioners are often hesitant to use research and use instead experience, eminence, or habit-based practices, unquote, as a basis for practice. And as a result, we have missed an opportunity to base our profession on a solid empirical foundation.
So what is the connection between uncertainty and decision making? We will look at the three topics of decision analysis, identify different types of uncertainty, and discuss the standard of evidence needed according to the type of decision being made.
Decision analysis is a field of knowledge which attempts to make decision-making as rational as possible, thereby reducing the amount of uncertainty in a given decision. Key terms are utility, desirability, evidence, judgment, preference, and probability. I'm not going to say I understand these statistical models fully, but I'm here to tell you that they exist and represent a view that better decisions can be made if a rational process is followed. While these approaches may seem overly analytical, there is value in ensuring that rational decisions can be made according to a set of consistent factors, and to that extent is a valuable exercise once we understand it. However, Bradley and Dreschler challenge the notion of defining uncertainty through pure probability by teaching us about uncertainty and why it can't be defined strictly in this way. They challenge the reduction of decision making to a single probability factor and fully recognize uncertainties can't be completely quantified. The topic of this paper, they are quoted, is that the nature of these uncertainties, how they should be quantified, and how they should be reflected in decision-making rules. The authors identify three types of uncertainty. First is ethical uncertainty, which is defined as not knowing exactly how to value the consequences of an action. For example, do we want to buy a Ferrari because it is fast, or do we buy a Toyota because it is safe? Second, option uncertainty means that we are uncertain about what actual consequences will occur because of a given decision. For example, will the weather be better in July or August for our summer vacation? Lastly, an agent can face state-space uncertainty when it is not known what the possible states of the world will be in the future. For example, if we go on a cruise ship vacation, will one of the passengers bring the virus on board? The authors offer a taxonomy of uncertainty that allows us to classify the various types of uncertainty faced by decision makers along three dimensions: nature, object, and severity. The nature of judgment being made takes the form of modal, empirical, or normative uncertainty. Modal is what is possible or what could be the case. Empirical is uncertainty about what is the case. And normative is uncertainty about what is desirable or should be the case. The second dimension is the object of judgment as being either factual or counterfactual. The role of factual uncertainty in decision making is clear, but counterfactual uncertainty is equally important because it can provide the alternatives to the agent's deliberations about what to do in a given situation. The third dimension, severity, addresses the difficulty that the agent has in making a judgment. Severity can be classified according to being either ignorant of any severity, severe severity, mild, or complete certainty of outcome. The article concludes that uncertainty has different natures, objects, and severities, a fact which precludes capture of all uncertainty by a single probability construct, meaning that it is not possible, in the view of these authors, to determine a single probability value. A conclusion that we all intuitively agree with, I am certain, but one that still leaves us with finding other ways to make decisions. Conaway and Goldhaber ask some important questions about the level of confidence, standards of evidence, and contextual factors of decision making. First, the standard of evidence needed is often inconsistently applied to a given decision due to academic findings, which very often exclude any reference to uncertainty in the measures being used themselves. A second issue is with the standard of evidence itself, and specifically how statistical significance is used and potentially misused when reporting on individual or institutional performance levels. The norm for determining certainty, according to statistical significance, is 95%, and over-reliance on this standard is questioned by the authors, especially in light of how this may or may not reflect contextual factors. These contextual factors, such as uncertainty in the results of test scores, is often not reported, and as a result, measures of school quality are made according to small differences which do not reflect the context. Other contextual factors worthy of consideration focus on the policy goal and its implications for the weight of evidence required, which reflects the potential impact of a policy, what the cost and reversibility of the decision being made are, and what are some other relevant policy alternatives. The conclusion cautions policymakers to guard against over-reliance and oversimplification on statistical significance and ignoring contextual factors when determining certainty regarding a decision. With differing views of uncertainty and different approaches to representations of uncertainty, what are some possible avenues for moving forward? Decision-making is not a solo sport, and there are a number of different ways to address this. Two of these ways are finding ways to engage teachers in conduct of research and applying a social-based decision-making theory process. We will look at both of those. This article by Whitty and Wisby argues that determining what should be included as evidence and how it should be used is contested by both policymakers and researchers. It warns that a complete embrace of educational research may lead to a hyper-technicist approach to teaching and learning. Problems include that the medical model of evidence use is poorly applied to education, political considerations are inevitable, and agreement between researchers and policymakers on what actually counts as evidence is not likely to happen. Barriers to the use of evidence include lack of evidence that evidence-informed practice actually works, and that research is often used only to confirm decisions already made. There is promise in engaging teachers in research projects to increase professional literacy, which is built, it is argued by the authors, through three factors: practical wisdom, technical knowledge, and critical reflection. The conclusion is supported that the rational linear model will not be sufficient in a post-truth world, and that other research traditions need to be included so that policy and practice can be both emotionally intelligent as much as rigorously rational.
A second way to engage with others is to adopt a more inclusive and organizational building decision-making process. Sense-making is one of those processes and initiates when there's a disruption to the flow of regular or ongoing events in the life of an organization. It is described as, quote, a way station on the road to a consensually constructed, coordinated system of action, unquote. Sense-making is focused on producing meaning from disruptive events, which either deviate from the expected or when it appears there is no clear path forward. Sense-making in organization occurs at, quote, the intersection of action and interpretation, unquote, and asks such questions as, how does something come to be an event for organizational members? What is the meaning of the event? And now, what should I do? Meaning, what action should I take?
There are many different conceptions of sense-making, so it is hard to get a grip on the definitive model. This model comes from Weick and states that sense-making initiates when there is a disruption to the flow of regular or ongoing events between the organism and its environment. These events need to be noticed or framed if sense-making is to be enacted, with meaning needing to be made from these events as part of the selection or queuing process. And finally, developing a plausible action plan creates a path forward for the organization. Plausibility of action and the construction of identity are two properties which make sense-making distinct from psychological-based processes and results in further questions that may be asked by members about the organization. According to Weick, the idea that decisions need to be plausible rather than accurate challenges the assumptions of rational decision-making. Some research he quoted suggested that reliance on individual judgment is not sufficient, especially since sometimes managers' perceptions are, quote, highly inaccurate, unquote, and that developing an action plan that sets clarity of direction, even if it is not perfect, is more desirable. The process of bracketing occurs, meaning or to determine the meaning of events, and especially taking action is how organizations make sense of events so that they can keep moving forward. Individual and organizational identity are key concepts of sense making. Who the members think they are as actors within the organization and who the members think the organization is demonstrated through such questions as, who are we? What are we doing? What matters and why? Are questions that members will ask about organizations, especially in light of disruptive events. And a clear identity for the individuals as group members must be identified coming out of disruptive events. Thank you for listening, and we will move on now to our discussion questions.
We've reached our destination and it's time for discussion questions. Can you remember a time when uncertainty existed in your workplace or other organizational setting? What were the key actions that resolved the uncertainty? What are your thoughts about the standard of evidence used in educational decision making? To what extent should there be a rational process in place to determine the required evidence? And lastly, are better decisions made by the group or by smart and capable individuals? Thanks for listening, and let's have a great discussion.